Welcome to Lab 8. This is it, the last lab of the class. You've got there, you're plugging ahead, you're doing well. Continue working on this. Again, these are skills that will be very helpful for you as we finish out your project. In particular, today we're going to talk about color and working with Adobe Audition, and then with our media encoder. Those three little pieces, really the first two, will be very helpful in getting a very high score on your final grade. All right, so pay a little bit of attention. We will do this quickly, and I'm going to take a couple of fairly complex subjects and try to just condense them down to what you actually need to know right now at this stage of your career about what you're doing. So, color. First of all, we all make mistakes, right? We overexpose something, we underexpose it. We just need to make it look consistent across the project. That's one of those things that makes us look professional versus looking, like we don't really quite know what we're doing yet. So, taking a moment at the end of your project, this is that last swath that we do, right? We started out editing the audio skeleton, we had some B-roll, we had the graphics, we go through all those pieces. Now we're going to come back, we're happy with all the transitions, the looks, everything feels right, it sounds good. We're going to go take care of that sound and color, just to make sure everything's polished, right? So this is that place where we're going to polish those two things. So let's start with color, and let's do that in this first video. So let's go to our color workspace. And what's going to pop up for us as we come in here, we've got what looks like a pretty standard piece, right? We've got our effect controls over here. We've got our timeline down below. We've got Sage here. I'm going to take this CG that we've added in the last lab off just to simplify some of what we're looking at, okay? But over here we have what's called the Lumetri Color tab, and we've got a lot of beautiful little things we can do. So if you're familiar with Lightroom, some of these are going to be very similar tools to what you use there. Should look pretty familiar. I want to add, though, that we have something very important over here by Effect Controls, is this thing called Lumetri Scopes. So it's important whenever we go ahead and make a decision about color that we don't just rely on our eyes, right? We want to rely on our scopes. Those scopes are the things that help us measure technically where we're putting things. Our eyes can deceive us, our monitors can be off, we can go off that way. We want to be able to use these. I'm going to include a couple of videos in this playlist from other sources that I want you to look at to help review how these scopes work. Very good videos with some experts to do it. In particular, mostly because my program is currently messed up. My scopes are not displaying, and so it'd be very hard for me to demonstrate to you where we want to be on scopes. But I'm going to rely on those videos to tell you a bit about what you're looking at. The few things I want to show you here on the Lumetri panel is we have three or four major sections. So one, in the basic correction, you have the white balance section where you can adjust the temperature of your shot. So this is where we talked about that color temperature. We can warm it up, make it very yellow. We can make it very blue. We can play with things there. We can also then adjust a tint within that to really kind of nail things in. Importantly, we have this little eyedropper. So if you didn't get a good white, you're not sure what yours is, if you can find something in the scene that is white, you can tell the eyedropper, hey, this thing right here, this is it, this is the color white, and it will adjust according to that for you. It's not a perfect tool, but it can be a good starting point on where you want to go. Okay, then we have our tone pieces, and this is where we do the majority of our work. We have our overall exposure we can adjust for. So if we underexpose, we can adjust to that and backwards again. Contrast, highlight, shadows, whites and blacks. And then here at the bottom, saturation. Best advice I ever received. Work backwards on this one. Start at the bottom. Set your saturation if you know you're a little undersaturated. If your camera is intentionally set to shoot a fairly flat image, which we'll do oftentimes, right? Go ahead and move that up a little bit. So start with your saturation, get it where you want it to be. Then you want to, using your scopes, which I can't show you here, adjust those blacks. So I'm going to reset everything there. I'm going to adjust those down a little bit here. I'm going to pull my whites a little back because I've got this really bright window. Then I'm going to do my shadows and highlights, right? I'm going to put those right where I want them to be. Okay. Mess with my contrast, and if all else fails, I can play with exposure. But generally speaking, you want to work, it's sort of like with math, we have that thing where you do the things that are exponentials and in parentheses first, and then you do multiplication, division, then you do your addition and subtraction. Here we want to kind of work that way. Whites and blacks first, shadows and highlights second, contrast and exposure last. And hopefully you never get to needing to mess with those, but you get to the point. There is, of course, an auto button. Don't use it. I mean, it's there if you want to look at it and say, okay, that's what they think, and then play with it and get it where you want. Try to use your scopes as explained in the additional videos. We do have a nice creative space where we can do some really nice things. We've got some presets here. Looks, if you will, is what we're going to call these. So say we wanted to do a nice, good black and white sort of piece. Here's a, we can preview. That's a very noir kind of look to that one. Generally speaking, these can be tricky to mess with. And for most of our work, you're not going to want the kind of look those do apply. However, one of the nice things we can do here is we can back off that sharpen a little bit, about, that -10 or so. That's the piece we do in interviews where we try to soften everyone just like we would portrait work, where we want to kind of soften the face, make it a little more flattering for folks. It doesn't truly unsharpen it, but it softens the image a touch. I'm also a big fan of the vignette. I overuse the things, but you've got individual curves where you can work through all kinds of color situations here. And importantly, with everything we do with Lumetri Color, it is going to show up as an effect that's applied to your video. So if you've done an interview and you've set the piece here, right, we can copy that, and then we can go down and find another piece and apply it to that. Also, we can just click on the piece copy, and then we can click on the new piece, right click, and then say paste attributes. So paste attributes doesn't replace the clip, but all the things that we've done to it then get pasted on. If we do that, it's actually, I set the wrong button. Let's say copy there. Come over here if I want to say paste attributes. It's going to ask me which of these things. Do I want to apply the motion effects I've added, the opacity, time remapping, or just the Lumetri Color? I can uncheck however many I want, including audio effects, paste those in place. Color is going to make a huge difference in what you do. This is a visual image, right? So you wouldn't take raw photographs of a client and just hand them the raw. You're going to go through and process them, right? You're going to do the same thing on your video. After you've got everything edited, you want to work your way through shot by shot and just apply work color. Oftentimes, once you set it for a sequence, right? We talk about shooting our sequences, right? So this truck sequence, if I've done the correct color correction for the first piece, then I can probably come through and just apply the same color to all of them. I still might have some changes, right? This piece has a lot of shadow in it. We come back here, we're in full sun, so we might have some big differences to how we're going to treat color in those shots. But generally speaking, that white balance is going to be the same. Generally speaking, our exposure is going to be pretty close to the same on most sequences. Again, here we might have a little trouble between shadow and brightness, but it's a quick process. Each shot of each sequence, you're going to take a little time. The ones after it, it's small tweaks. It's copy, paste attributes, and then small tweaks. This makes your stuff look professional. Again, just as we've talked about in photography, we're not going to hand over the raw stuff. You don't want to turn over just raw, unprocessed, untouched stuff here. It doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to look fancy, but you want to make sure everything's consistent, that it looks good, and it looks the best. It represents you the best. Particularly if you're like me, if your camera's set up to shoot flat in the first place, which is to help you have more control over dynamic range, then you've got room to do that stuff here. So play with color, and then the next thing we're going to talk about is how we share stuff to other projects.